today. It's been a really great day. It's a good discussion. I think that this is sort of like the capstone for the event. We've got some really great panelists here. Scott McDonald, the giant floating head in the background. Angie Dick, Dave Test, and Tim Simpson, who all have some very different perspectives on the idea of the classroom of the future and of teaching and learning at Penn State. So I'm going to go ahead and let them sort of introduce themselves and tell you guys a little bit about themselves and the projects that they're involved with. And I think we can start with.
Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, that's enormous. So I'm the purpose for which I'm here today is I'm the director of the Innovation Studio in the College of Education. So that's an initiative to help faculty integrate technology into their teaching. And specifically, one of the focus areas of the Innovation Studio is on learning spaces. So over the past year, I've been working with Mike Rook, who's a doctoral student in instructional systems, to look at the research that's been done around learning spaces, largely because we're building this space, and I'm having to make all sorts of design decisions about the space, and I was looking for some guidance on how to do that, and there doesn't seem to be a lot out there that was all that helpful, especially stuff that actually drew on theories of learning and teaching, contemporary ideas about that. So that's why I'm here, and that's who I am.
Sure. I had a couple of slides. So Tim Simpson, I'm in faculty in engineering. I'm both mechanical engineering and industrial engineering, and here more so on the Learning Factory. Serve as director of that, and essentially our program within the Learning Factory tries to coordinate interactions with our senior engineering design students, 4 to 5 students per team, working with industry on trying to help them solve real-world problems. And so over the course, these projects are a semester long, and so between the fall and the spring semester, we'll do about 130 projects across 12 different departments, engage about 600 students for about 80 different clients and sponsors. And so my classroom space is very, very different, very, very flexible, very wide range of needs. Going back, if you go back up first to so this is the space, the actual Learning Factory building itself, from the classroom space that we can fit 30 to 40 people in, tables, chairs, everything on wheels there, move around, lecture style, discussion style, brainstorming, to 3D printers, to machines, to shop space, that's all within co-located. We're fortunate in that regard. Next slide, though, shows you the traffic that has to come through that space and all the respective spaces. In the spring now, or at the end of every semester, we have a showcase so all of the design teams can show off their projects that they've come up with. In the spring, we fill the Bryce Jordan Center now. So it's about 135 teams. 90 of those have gone through our facilities in one or more area to be able to do this. And it's everything from Boeing, GM, Lockheed, helicopters and that, to healthcare, to services, to package flow. I mean, it's just a wide range of projects and needs. And so as you can imagine, unfortunately that map does not show up well, but one of the things that we've started to do and think about as we've gone distributing across departments, distributing across our students, we have to now distribute those design spaces as well. And obviously they can't all fit in one building at one time. So now the question and the trick for me is, how do we enable teams to interact and work together across departments, across colleges, across very diverse and different spaces, and what does that look like? So I was excited to be here today to sort of hear what other people are doing in that regard, and then also answer any questions. We have the learning spaces there Scott mentioned about. We'd love to be able to talk more and learn more about that, and use this sort of as a playground to try some of those things out, because we have a big demand and a big need for doing that. So I think with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Test. I'm the group lead for Technology Classroom Support here at University Park. We manage the 255 fully technology-enabled technology classrooms on campus. We have another 100 rooms that have a projector and a hookup for a laptop. So we have around 360 rooms total that we manage on campus. We do the design, the implementation, the renovation, the podium installation, selection of equipment, and the orientation training on that and the support. We're the first line support for that. So when somebody has a problem, they call us and we go and help them. We are currently in the middle. We just received $5 million from Graham Spanier's discretional funding to convert another 50 of our current projector-only rooms to full technology over the course of the summer. So we're currently gearing up towards that. We're also finishing up a space that's actually right next to the Krause Innovation Studio, 202 Chambers, which is sort of a new design for us. That's kind of designed to complement the Krause Innovation Studio. It's more of a blended learning style environment. So we're looking forward to getting that up and running.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angela Dick. I'm an instructional designer out of College of Ag / Education Technology Services. And right now, my team and I are working on a project that deals with, it's being funded through NIH. It deals with environmental toxicology, really focusing on STEM learning, and also one of the main focuses of this initiative that we're working on is that we're developing a new model of learning for students. And our project is to focus on the K-12, but we're really starting to look at this now and how we can move it into the higher ed setting and how it can be scalable. So those are the things that we've been looking at in terms of using the flipped classroom approach, learning spaces, project and problem-based learning, inquiry, those types of things.
I'm glad Tim mentioned that he wanted to kind of learn about what other people are doing in learning spaces. And I do want to mention that the second part of this session, because we have a decent amount of time here, is an opportunity for you guys to share some of what you're doing with learning spaces in your own areas and maybe get some feedback from the panelists about those projects. So I wanted to start my questions off with just sort of setting the stage that Penn State is a fairly old university. There's a lot of really old buildings on this campus, and I think that a lot of our classrooms were designed for this old style of university teaching, which was really the pinnacle of teaching at the university was the lecture. That was sort of the ultimate transfer of knowledge from experts standing on a stage to the students, and that was sort of, I think, an antiquated idea. We know a lot more about education. We know that sort of style doesn't really work very well, yet we still have a lot of these classrooms that were built for that sort of model. So with that said, and as people like Dave are starting to really try to do more with the classrooms and put things in the classroom to enable new kinds of teaching, my general question to all of you guys, just to get things started, is really just in general what is working, what is not working in our classrooms. You have to go in any particular order that thought you wanted to jump at.
Well, we've been sort of fortunate with the general purpose classrooms that we've been able to receive some funding, both some life cycle and some one-time funding from the President's office to do some significant upgrades. We still do have a fairly large percentage of classrooms that have fixed seating. So one of our priorities is simply switching out fixed seating for movable seating, because that alone lets you reconfigure the room for what you want to do with the room, and it opens up a lot of opportunities that you wouldn't normally have. It also allows us to do things like renovating the classrooms to put in carpet as opposed to tile. Makes the environment feel more inviting, softer, warmer. Just sort of general paint, simple things like that go a long way towards making the space more inviting, making it feel more like this is a space where we can collaborate versus a space where I'm going to stand here and talk for 50 minutes and you're going to listen. And changing the environment goes a long way towards that. The funding also allows us to do things like technology upgrades. A lot of our professors are still very much attached to overhead transparency projectors. We're slowly trying to get them away from that, doing things like putting in document cameras where they can take their old transparencies and put them on that and project them. Putting in 2 projectors so that they can have their notes on a document camera and their presentation on another projector. So things like that, trying to use the space as we can and using our budget the best we can to make these spaces better is one of the goals we have right now, because we still do have a lot of challenging rooms and a lot of challenging buildings. the trend is almost always towards less seating, fewer seats in the classroom. And one of the reasons for that is because when you move from fixed seats to movable seats, you literally have to have more space per seat to accommodate that.
But over time,
Mhm.
a seat creeps in.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you look at some of those rooms, they pack
Yeah.
gills.
Now there is documented seating limits for those rooms, and people are constantly pushing those limits. And on one hand, I can understand that because they have to put students in the seats, they have to accommodate it. Our classroom utilization between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. is over 99%. I can think of only one room on campus between 11 and 2 that's available more than one day a week. It's available for something else than class. And so, yeah, and so it becomes really difficult to find a room that fits all of your needs. But we have to balance that with, being able to be adaptable. And so that is definitely one of the challenges.
I think a new challenge that instructors, faculty, instructional designers, any person that deals directly with students is that if we haven't noticed, we need to realize that our students are changing, that this generation of students, if you don't know the jargon term, net students, net generation students, look it up. These are the students that are beginning to enter our college classrooms. These are the students in the K-12. These are the students that are defined by those who have never experienced a world without the internet. And those are the students that we're now teaching. And the way that we've been taught in the past is not the same that we can teach our students now. It's not going to be the same. They're not going to be responsive. Our learners stepping into our classrooms are active learners. They're not the passive learner that's going to sit there and listen to a 50-minute lecture. They need to be engaged. They need to be active. They need to be active participants, not only in their learning, but also in the assessment processes. So these generations of students, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's wrong or we think it's good, it's changing. And I mean, this is the same thing that our people in our positions faced 50 years ago, is a big change in learners. And this is what we're starting to look at. So whether that's good or bad in our current classrooms, it's what we have to face and we have to come to terms with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the tensions, and that Dave brought up there was this question of how do you get the pedagogy to change the physical space doesn't change first. But if you change the physical space, you get faculty that are uncomfortable with the new space. So they say, well, I don't want the movable chairs. I want my overheads. How can I still do my overheads if you take the overhead projector out of my room? So I think there's this there's a social cultural piece to this with faculty that's critically important. We have to help them think about teaching first, and then finding technology, including physical spaces, to support those new kinds of practice. And right now, what we tend to do is, there's sort of two different models. One model is we just go in and change the classroom. We don't help the faculty figure out how to do anything in that new space. And then, not surprisingly, you go back and see that they've rearranged the desks into rows, and they're back. They brought their overhead projector from home, and they're back to teaching the way they were before you spent $1 million to renovate the space. Or you ask the faculty how you want the renovation to look, and they say, well, I'd like all the chairs to be bolted to the floor, and I want them all to face the front where the podium is. So, I feel like that's the conversation that I'm most interested in is how do we think about these learning spaces in a way that can push faculty, but also that provide them the supports to sort of scaffold them from where they are to this new version of pedagogy that the space takes advantage of. So I don't have an answer to that. That's what I think about in terms of the learning spaces right now.
Yeah, I'll just add, we like the flexible spaces, going into a room with everything bolted down as you're stuck there in some sense. But we also want to be able to write on the walls. We want to be able to put sticky notes everywhere. We want to be able to have 2, 3 projectors or whatever monitors going on at once, so you've got other people coming in and Skyping in and talking, and yet here's my presentation, and there's a news feed and Twitter feed over here, and I got somebody else going on with something over there, all in that one space. And just again having the flexibility to do all of that.
Dave, we have 2 faculty here, and they're providing some feedback about their learning spaces. Generally, you talk to a lot of faculty, you watch them teach, you're slowly upgrading these classrooms, you can maybe observe the kind of changes that happen when these new technologies are introduced. Do they like it? Do they adapt to it? Do they ignore the new technologies?
There's always a wave. Often what happens is we get approached by a particular faculty member, usually from a department that might have priority scheduling in a particular room or group of rooms, to say, these rooms don't really meet our needs for this reason. Like in the terms of College of Music, they had rooms in the music building that really hadn't had significant upgrades since the early 90s, and it was holding them back in terms of the media that they could present and how they could interact with the students. And we had talked earlier about someone had mentioned that they put in some smart boards and no one ever used them, and we ran into that exact same problem in Pond. We put in 2 $15,000 Polyvision walk and talk boards. No one used them. We ended up giving them to the police auxiliary because we just had to get them out of the room. Yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons for that was the room we had was long, and you have to have the smart board low enough so that you can write on it, and that means that the people that are more than 5 rows back can't see what you're looking at, what you're doing. In the case of music, though, they wanted some smart boards, and we talked to them about it. We ended up going with a Epson Brightlink interactive projector that you present it onto a normal whiteboard. It's just any whiteboard, but then it uses a pen that tracks what you're doing. And so you can use it as a whiteboard, you can use it as a mouse, you can use it to annotate. Music loves them. They use them all the time because they will put a piece of music up, either put some stabs up on the screen. They can literally draw the music on the screen, and then they can annotate it. They can play a piece of music and have the accompanying score there where they can highlight things. So a lot of it comes down to listening to what the faculty want and trying to anticipate what they might need. They might just be frustrated, but they don't necessarily know what the technologies are that are available to help them. And so a large part of the job is just keeping up to date on what's out there, seeing, and like John Ho said, trying. You just have to try stuff. It doesn't always work, but if you don't try, then you're not going to learn anything from it. And the 2 renovated music rooms are 2 that I really think have helped our instructors a lot, because we sort of try to identify their needs, try to anticipate their needs, and they seem to be really enjoying the space as a result.
I have a question for Tim about the reaction from students about the learning factor in those kinds of spaces. And I'll preface it by a story that I just heard that was kind of discouraging, that we're really involved in this idea of flipping the classroom, or kind of removing the lecture from the classroom, and maybe packaging that up into a concise video so students can watch that before class, get that sort of static one-way content out of the way, and do a lot more active content in the classroom. And we just had an experience where one of the faculty that we were working with doing this just got kind of a revolt from our students and said, we don't like this, we're not learning as much, can you just please go back to lecturing in the standard way in classes. And the interesting thing is that the students' test scores were actually higher than the years of lecturing, so they were actually learning more, and their perceptions that they weren't learning as much. And I think that there was some issue with maybe the students just not liking this sort of model, reacting negatively to it. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, do students experience a learning factor and have a positive experience and want other classrooms to be like this, or is it you have to convince them that this is a better way to learn?
It's a couple different ways. It's not the same in each department. So in some cases we have made the flip, so to speak, there, in that trying to teach them the methods, the tools that they need to use for their project has actually been done sooner. We don't do it online design per se, but we've got it in a junior level class now, so that when I'm there my senior year doing this, I can just focus on the project, because the students were saying, why are you trying to teach me all this stuff? I got this project I got to get done. Stop. Give me the time to do that. In other departments where that's not the case, though, this is the learning factory projects are the harder ones. They're the industrial strength, because not only are you having to learn stuff in the class, but you're also having to do these projects on top of it. And so we see both sides there. In that regard, I think those that we have seen, for those that were able to sort of make that flip or make that transition, we have seen a sort of step change in what the students are capable of doing. It's a much richer experience for them, for the industry. Even the instructors like it a lot better, but not everybody's there yet. So what can we, from that, transition to these other departments that are interested in becoming involved in that?
Scott, are you're involved in training the teachers of the future? What kind of conversations are you having with them about how they take advantage of new modern classrooms, or teach and try to not be lecturers?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the conversation first about pedagogy. So what should you be teaching like? But I think in many ways K-12 environments are just as conservative as universities, if not more so. I mean, they don't have millions of dollars to renovate classrooms typically. They can't redesign their learning spaces to fit this new metaphor for what teaching and learning looks like. So I think it can be a lot more challenging actually for the K-12 teachers. I mean, I want to go back to something Dave said that I like, that I think is important, and I'm going to say it a little differently, because in my field we talk about problems of practice, but both with K-12 teachers and I think with faculty, it makes sense to start with a question for them about what problem are you trying to solve. About your current classroom isn't meeting your needs, and Dave was talking about that, and I think that gets you, if you can start the conversation there, you're much better off than saying, well, do you want tables that's 8 people, or do you want things bolted down, or do you want some of both, or what? Because they don't know how to answer those questions, because they haven't thought, I think, deeply about the problems that they're trying to solve about their own teaching. So sitting down with faculty, whether they're in high school or middle school, or whether they're teaching philosophy in the College of Liberal Arts at Penn State, and asking them what they're trying to accomplish with their class, and then talking about how learning space might support or not support that, I think is really important.
Angie, I know that you've done some classroom flipping along the lines of the flipping. You kind of see learning spaces as putting a virtual element to it. So talk about your experiences.
Sure. With the project that we're working on right now, it's a bunch of things. One is the approach of flipping the classroom, so taking the element of lecturing out of the classroom, moving it to a space outside of the classroom where the students will have an opportunity to leave those lectures and absorb that information. And so that element is moved into a virtual learning space. We call it online collaborative tool. I've heard it called many different things. Bottom line is it's a different space than in the classroom, than in your working classroom. And what we use personally within the project that we've been working on is Facebook groups. I know everybody who Facebook, and we've talked, we listened to the student panel earlier. The reason we decided to use that was because we felt that the learning curve would be fairly low for students. And with that, we then built a virtual place where the teacher and students both groups had presence, and that the teacher could post homework assignments, videos about certain concepts, things that they wanted the students to view and absorb, articles. Students were able to answer homework questions, rely on other students to kind of talk back and forth about certain things that they were doing within the class. And the students were there for each other, but then also if the students had a question for the teacher was able to answer that. So it didn't have the teacher being online 24/7, but the teacher had a presence and the students knew that. So there was that space outside of your formal classroom. Then within the formal classroom, when the students came to class the next day, they technology.com that Brett showed us earlier. We have Khan Academy. Students are absorbing in different fashions outside of our formal classrooms. They're capable of doing that on their own. But what they're having a big problem with is being able to apply what they need to do with that information they're absorbing into something, and how to apply it and how it connects to them. And that's what they really need, that expert that's on hand in the classroom to help them be able to do. And that's kind of the missing link in some of what we're finding. So we had that formal classroom where the teacher was present at hand to be able to do a project with them, to answer questions, and it was a lot more group work and team work than it was, sitting in rows facing the teacher lecturing in that classroom. So we had the virtual component where students were able to work offline out of the formal classroom, but then we also had that formal classroom component where we had the teacher being there as more of the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage.
So I want to have a question. Scott, we'll start with this one, and then we'll kind of go around. But I'm wondering what the process has been for all of you in designing and implementing new learning spaces. I know that these things are expensive, they're time-consuming to implement. We might only have a few opportunities to do a couple really modern spaces in a typical year. So what is the process like? What are some of the challenges? And again, start with Scott with the Innovation Studio. What was that process like for you? How did you approach the design process?
Yeah, it's been really interesting actually because I have no idea how to design a learning space. I was sort of just doing this by the seat of my pants. So I think that's part of the reason I became interested in it is because a lot of these spaces are not being designed with sort of a theoretical foundation. They're sort of just, I designed based on sort of intuition, and I think that's a somewhat dangerous space to be in. The classroom space I could talk more specifically about because there's a classroom space attached to it, and we did a lot of thinking around that and what we wanted to accomplish in there, and we went to Steelcase and looked at a bunch of different, and Dave was part of one of those trips, and we went and looked at a lot of different furniture and a lot of different layouts, and we really thought hard about what we wanted to try to accomplish in there. And, for example, one of the things that came out of all that process was a real intentionality about the spaces, both the larger collaborative space in the Krause studio and in the classroom. There essentially are no computers. There are places for people to plug devices in to be able to display information, but there's one computer in the classroom that has to drive the Crestron and all the other the Brightlinks. There's one Brightlinks whiteboard, interactive whiteboard in there. But for the most part, we were thinking about it as this is a place where people are going to come and work together from their own equipment, from their own devices, and what we needed to provide for them was a shell, was flexible, and it sounds a lot like what Tim was talking about in his space, and I'd be interested to see what it looks like, but the idea that it's flexible and movable, but also that you can project information into all different parts of the space. So if I'm sitting at a table with my group and I want to show another group my stuff, that's pretty seamless to do. So I think we tried as best we could to base those design decisions on things that I know and that we know about what good teaching looks like, but it's hard because I don't think there's a lot of really in-depth research about the impact of these learning spaces on the teaching in particular, and then by extension learning. So, but I'd love to hear what other people, what their design process was.
Ours has been mostly trial and error over the years. At one point, we saw trapezoidal tables that had wheels on them, and they weren't the usual rectangular ones. And we tried them, and ooh, you can make this shape and that shape, and they go this way, and they roll all around. And so when our classroom space came online, hey, that's cool. I'm going to try that. I think a lot of it's also learning as I go and visit other schools, looking at their spaces. was just at Purdue recently, and they have the new Neil Armstrong building that houses aerospace, dean's offices, and then the engineering education. And so it was the engineering education folks were very excited because they actually got to inform, in some sense, the spaces as it was being developed. And so that was really neat, and seeing what does a classroom for 120 design students be able to work with, little pods for everything, storage space for this, glass walls for that, projectors everywhere, you know, walls that have artwork on it, and it looks good, and it draws you in, and you get excited by doing it. It's not just the sterile white paint. You know, you can draw on the walls, you can take a picture of it and do this sort of stuff. And so seeing that, and as I was going around, I was taking 3 or 4 pictures of everything with my camera, sending it back, saying, we got to get one of these, we got to get one of that. So I think a lot of it, like I said, trial and error. The other thing I'm trying to do now is reach out to folks in architecture. And so really, they deal with space, they do buildings, and they do this. And so what do they know? How can they inform this? And I think really an interesting intersection would be sort of the educational folks, the instructional design folks, the classroom folks, the architects, and then, you know, different user groups that have this, and getting together and brainstorming that, designing it, figuring out how to do it, and seeing what works. I mean,
sometime next Wednesday.
Are you here? Sure. Next Wednesday I'm free. Yeah, after that, no. Anyway, but so that's exciting, and I think that's part of one of the good and the bad about Penn State is we have all those groups here. It's just a matter of, again, finding them. So that was, again, another reason to come here today and hear what others are doing and see who else is interested.
I wholeheartedly agree that group needs to exist. I'm sure that Scott would definitely like to be part of that. So you have interesting challenges because, you know, the kind of space that you have, there's a lot of really expensive technology in there. I don't know if you've had grants to fund that, or there's lots of public sources of money to pay for that. Those are very advanced classrooms. I think we're struggling to get basic baseline level of technology into the classroom. Is that, how do you feel about that? Are we just struggling to just get something in there?
Well, there was a long time where all of the GPCs that did not have projectors in them, MediaTek actually maintained a pool of, I want to say, 18 to 20 projectors on carts. And they would literally have 10 vans, and every class change, they'd run around to a classroom and they'd wheel in a projector, they'd plug in their laptop, and then they'd run it out to the next place. And not only was that very time and resource intensive, but it was costly because they had to maintain that. There's just a lot of issues involved. Replacing all of that with the one projector in the room ended up being almost a bit of a wash in terms of the cost of money over the long term, and the convenience factors skyrocketed because the instructor no longer has to. They come in the first day of class and they realize, oh, there's no projector in here. So then that night they have to call MediaTek and they have to schedule it, and then it might take a couple of days for that to go into process, and they end up losing a week or two of their class. So just simply having a projector in there made a big difference. We try to standardize, and not only is that for instructional reasons, because it's much easier to train somebody if they're using a classroom over here, they go to another building and it's the same. That's an instructional benefit. But it also enables us to buy things in bulk, buy Crestron switches and things like that in large amounts, which gets a significant discount. And then we run into issues like asbestos. There's still a lot of buildings on campus that have asbestos. Sackett building has asbestos throughout the walls and the floors, so we actually cannot run any Cat 5 anywhere in that building as a result, and that limits us. It also means that the cost of the project doubles. If you take asbestos flooring out, it basically doubles the cost of any renovation. So we have these realities, but we try to set a standard that we're not going to go below that standard, because we don't want to run into a situation where an instructor goes to one room and then they go to another room and it's significantly less useful or less functional. But we do constantly have that battle. We've been lucky in that we've been able to establish a 4-year life cycle for our equipment, and we have recurring funds now to life cycle that equipment. In addition, we have some one-time fees, but again, as John Ho this morning said, you can't rely on that because it can go away at any point. So having the life cycle is critical to keeping that up to date and keeping you up to date on what you need to do as the next step.
Talking in regard to virtual learning space, there's a lot of discussion about how we can change our spaces here, in the physical space in our rooms or in our buildings. But in terms of talking about how we decided to go about using Facebook groups, is we decided on the fact that this is something that the students were doing. This is a tool that students were using. And as we listened to our student panel earlier, they had discussed about how they, when they're doing a paper, they automatically use whatever it is that they want to use, whether it be collaboration or Google groups. So we decided to just go ahead and use Facebook groups, and that the learning curve would be minimal. Something that we kind of learned in the process of the teachers' involvement in this virtual space is the recommendation we had found was that if the students know that the teacher has a presence, the teacher needs to have that presence. The teacher needs to respond to questions. The teacher needs to make posts. They need to be reflective on their assignments that they're posting. If it is a virtual space that is an informal space developed by students, don't try to control it as an instructor. Let that be an informal space that students can bring in. Let them be there to do whatever it is that they need to do for their class and to be able to collaborate. And the third thing that we had found out of, kind of looking at the learning spaces that were developed for this project is there is a true benefit of having more than one of these learning spaces.
So I want to turn one quick question over to Scott, and I think that he and I both feel really strongly that we need to understand the sort of behaviors and pedagogies that are your goal for particular spaces, and then design spaces around that. So ideally, I think we've all heard that flying by the seat of our pants to some extent designing these spaces, but in the ideal situation we're understanding what the instructional needs are and then building the spaces around that. I'm wondering, Scott, if you could sort of kind of deconstruct the sort of ideal classroom situation, what are the sort of pedagogies that should be leading our discussion, the behaviors that we're really shooting for in the designing spaces around it?
Well, I could sure try. That's a tall order. But I guess to some extent that answer depends. I mean, ideally, you want to have students in a context where they're able to talk to each other about the content, where there's a faculty member there that can scaffold that conversation, so it can be present and move from groups of talking students to help the students make sense of whatever it is they're working on. That they have access to the information they need to do whatever tasks that you're asking them to do. So that often means technology. Having access to the internet obviously is important for most of this stuff. Engaging them in authentic tasks, and again, it sounds like what Tim's space is doing is exactly that. So not trying to get them to be doing something that's real and meaningful, and doing that in small collaborative groups. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence that no matter what type of content you're trying to help people understand, that environment is pretty good. So I think interestingly enough, we don't have a lot of spaces on campus that are designed to do that sort of work. And even if you think about, what is that like in a 700-person lecture hall, and I think there are folks who are starting to experiment. Richard Sear, I know in Bio 230 this semester is trying some things, and I know that there are experiments going on campus around how do we make bigger classes work that way. But I do think, going back to what Tim said earlier, a lot of it is just straight trial and error. It's like, we bought those hexagonal tables because they sort of look cool and they make cool shapes, and I think that happens a lot in this. There's not a sense of that any group is talking to each other, and I'm definitely interested in having a conversation with Tim and Chris and other folks who are interested in learning spaces, because I think that's important, and bringing in architecture and anthropology and sociology and people who study human interaction. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways we could attack that, and but I think, at a place like Penn State, one of the questions is, how does it look in these very different physical spaces? How does it look different in 100 Thomas versus 121 Chambers, which is a room designed for 24 students? So I think that's a really, what is pedagogically, how do we scale or design for these varied spaces? Because those things aren't going to change. Doesn't seem likely anyway anytime soon. It's not likely, that physics 211 and 212 are going to become 24-person seminars. So if the institution supports certain kinds of practices for certain courses, we have to recognize that and take the best advantage of it as we can. And I think that involves having a conversation about how you get closer to that ideal of students able to interact with each other. And the last thing I'll say about that is I was saying before that there's a cultural shift that's required of faculty, but I think it was Chris that said it. But there's also a cultural shift that the students have to make, because they're resistant to not sitting in like when you change it from a lecture hall, if their expectation was that they're coming in for a lecture and suddenly they have to talk with the 5 people around them, they can be sort of cantankerous about that. So I think there's a shift around that too that we got to think about.
So you mentioned the ideal situation a few times. I'm wondering, Tim, if you feel that what you've done with the Learning Factory is this have you created the ideal environment for engineering education? Where's it falling short?
It's not the ideal. I mean, it's okay for now, but you look at two big discussions that are starting to occur. One is, what is the equivalent? As more things go online or sort of low res as the buzzword is, what does that look like for a design course, which is very hands-on? You're going to lose a lot going virtual. So where is that going? The other piece is then also trying to reflect the realities of the world today is doing globally distributed teams, for instance. And so we're actually now, as part of this, we partner up engineering students at Penn State with students in China at Shanghai Jiaotong, Seoul National University, and National University of Singapore. And so all of a sudden, how are you factoring in that 12, 13, 14-hour time difference? How do those students engage? What's the technology? And they don't have the Polycon system over there, so even though we've got the high end here, we can't talk to each other. Skype's broken right now, so I'm just going to call on my cell phone and hope that works. I mean, is that the way they're going to be really doing these interactions in industry? And how can we better enable them to practice that while they're here in the classroom, so they're more ready for it once they go out there in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the concept of ideal is that you never really reach ideal. It's sort of compounded in a general purpose classroom setup, because you have a math class followed by a philosophy class followed by a speech comm class in humanities, and so you're never going to create that. So you have to, in some ways, you can specialize a room to a certain extent to fit a certain either pedagogy or a certain department's needs, as long as you maintain that use for everyone else. And an example I'll use is we recently renovated Borland, which was the old creamery processing plant, into classroom space, and the main users of those rooms are art history. Their requirements were that they needed a dual monitor setup on the Macs and the PCs. Most places we only had one that needs to be moved to the projector. They needed two because they needed to have a presentation where they're showing 2 pieces of art at the same time from the same presentation, so they can compare that. They also needed much more color accurate projectors than what we normally put in, because they're doing art history. And so those were things where we're able to accommodate those requests and do that in the room without really making it overly complex or sacrificing its functionality for everyone else that needs to use the room too. And that's a fine line, but you're usually able to accommodate at least one, if not a couple of needs of somebody to get a significant improvement in how they're teaching.
Something that we, in developing content and promoting content to work with our model, we definitely look at learning and in relationship to discovery, exploration, experimentation kind of something or do an idea that isn't a cookie cutter type of investigation. Having them really ask the questions and bringing real world type of issues into the classroom.
So I think we all can see that enrollment in classes is going up as we try to get more efficient as a university. Unfortunately, we're, as was mentioned earlier, packing more bodies into the classroom. I'm wondering if modern ideas of learning spaces are counter to this trend towards larger classes. Can we do interesting things with active learning in large classrooms? Does that work? And your successful learning experience has happened in smaller classrooms?
For me, it's scaling up from, for every 4 or 5 more students, it's another project and another industry sponsor. And so that's where I'm seeing the scale up issues. We sort of limit ours or cap ours. All the projects are divided into sections of about 30 students, 25 to 30 students per faculty member, and that's 5 or 6 teams by the time you divide that all up. So as that grows up and other departments have gotten on board, there are economies of scale in that, but now the variety increases, but it leads to a richer experience as well. And now that we can swap, whether it's all a single discipline of all mechanical engineers or some mechanicals and electricals, or pick your discipline, and now let's work across colleges. I think we want to work more towards that, but it becomes, again, it's the scale-up issue. And how can you do that and provide those same set of experiences for these larger classrooms? And we're still scratching our heads on that.
Scott, what's your take on large classrooms?
Yeah, I think you can have terrible pedagogy anywhere, so I don't think you have to have a bad class. I think certainly there are challenges in big classrooms and big class sizes. If you're thinking of a 1 to 700 ratio, that's tough. I don't know. There's only so much you can do with that. I think, but there's scale on both sides. I don't know. I guess even if I think, which I do, that 700-person lecture halls are not an ideal environment, and Angela got to some of the issues around this. I think it's just, having a whole bunch of people go to one place to listen to one talk is remarkably inefficient, considering what other possibilities there are. So what you have to really ask yourself is, what is the upside of doing that with students? And if you can make universities an economic argument that sort of model should be reconsidered, then they might be interested in reconsidering it. But I do think those courses can be economic drivers of institutions, and I think that makes it harder to make change in those places. So that was a long, complicated way of saying, small classrooms aren't always better and big classrooms aren't always worse, but you're certainly more likely to get something good if you've got a smaller group of students and a single faculty member.
Again, what's common to all of those, they're within the room, there's breakout, but also there's another meeting time for every single one of those classes. Bio 3, big lecture, small meeting time. Bio 110, big lecture, smaller labs. So again, I think unfortunately, the reality of the classrooms, and even from Chem 110, that's been that way for 50 years. They have the recitation.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's something that sort of, in some cases, they lost.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna. Yeah, in fact, all of the classes that you just mentioned use clickers, and I think the reason is that the larger the classroom gets, the more disconnected and anonymous each person in the classroom feels, and the clickers provide a mechanism by which they're able to interact on a personal level, yet they still keep the sort of an anonymity to in order to be able to be wrong, it's not like they're being called on and then they have to look around and say, what are people going to judge what I'm thinking? They're able to respond, they're able to interact, and sort of critically engage the content. It's also a great tool to encourage discussion. So you can lecture for 10 or 15 minutes and then ask a question that really requires some discussion on the student's part. And one of the most satisfying things about clickers is sitting in a room and you hear the instructor talk for 10 minutes and then he asks a question and the whole room is just this cacophony of noise. And you initially think it's just people talking on their phones or whatever, but no, they're seriously debating the issues that they're talking about. And that's great from a pedagogical standpoint because they're having to articulate their thoughts on what they just learned. They're having to defend their assumptions to their colleagues, and it's very interesting to see how there's a technique with clickers called peer instruction, which isn't of course new, but you ask a question in isolation and you get the chart of what the response group is, and then you have them basically defend your response to the person next to you. And then you vote again and you show that chart. You don't reveal what the correct answer is, even if there is a correct answer. And it's remarkable how almost every time the correct answer will emerge after that group discussion. Even if individually no one, is 25%. It always seems to arrive at that issue. And so the clickers, they're not a panacea for the issue of large classrooms, but they do bring back some of that interactivity and engagement that you would normally have in like a 20 or 30 seat class. And so in that way, I think they're a real benefit to universities and in particular to large classes at universities.
I have a million more questions, but I wanted to make sure that you guys got an opportunity to ask a question.
Can I say one quick follow-up, Chris? I'm sorry. I just wanted to respond briefly about Sam Richards' class. I think he's a great example. And I think, but what makes him a great example actually is a lecture. I think his lectures are great and they're entertaining and they're thought-provoking. But Sam's built a whole ecosystem around that's designed to help the students understand what's going on. So the lecture is sort of it's like almost like a motivational speech. And I'm not trying to diminish what he does in there, but what he's trying to do there is get them kick-started. And then there's all these other points of access through YouTube and through discussion groups and through other avenues that he's really sees his course as an ecosystem designed to help people understand the content that he's trying to help them understand around race. And so I think that's the difference between a lecture and an ecosystem designed around a lecture or with lecture as one component. And I think that's an important distinction that's worth talking about.
And I think we all need to face that not every instructor or faculty will be Sam Richards. It's all of the other components that he does in his classroom that really helps learning. It's those other learning spaces that students are able to go to really take what he's teaching and start applying it.
choosing the right technology for the right application. There's that Steve Jobs quote that came out earlier that consumer groups focus groups don't work because consumers don't know what they want. It's up to you to figure out what they need. And so we've begun, I think, we've been doing a faculty survey for many years, but we've started doing focused faculty surveys for people that use the general purpose technology classrooms. And we're not asking them what they want, we're asking them what their problems are. This year that we just got our initial batch in, number one problem is heat and cooling, which is going to be an issue because we have a lot of old buildings. But then a lot of the issues come down to, I have one projector and I really want to have notes and my presentation at the same time. And right now I have to switch between the two, which sort of breaks the flow of my presentation. So what that tells us is they're probably going to need two projectors in the room. So we have to start changing our guidelines to how we have our default setup to accommodate that. And it's more expensive, and then issues like sight lines come in, because if I put a projector over here, that person's not going to see it. So then I might have to put in two projectors and mirror them so that they can see it and they can see it. So, but yeah, it really is important to not only think about what they're asking you for, but thinking about what they can't really put into words that they need. And that's obviously a tall order, but that's sort of the business we're in.
Question. We do build cars over there, so we can do that one. But it's more understanding. Part of my last slide there is we put together a booklet and a map of understanding. What this is the slide that was up there. What is available where on campus beyond just Learning Factory, so that if I can't make it directly in my shop, I at least know where I can find that. Because now when I'm working or talking to companies, what's critical for me is understanding I don't want to promise something we can't deliver. And so, all right, as we're scoping those projects or talking to these companies, if they need composites or nano stuff, for instance, if we don't have direct access to that or easy access to it, then we need to make sure, all right, well, that's not the right project for us. So I have indirectly been doing that mapping to make sure that the two line up so that we can deliver on what we say we are. And I'm not sure to what extent we get in a situation where we don't have that technology, or we don't have the right space, how do we do that? I think more is now, how do we start taking that experience and moving it down into other levels in the junior year, in the sophomore year, in the freshman year, moving up to the grad, or enabling more students from other colleges to become involved with that experience. And I think there again, the scaling issues, and you can't replicate Learning Factory everywhere, that sort of thing. So how do we again have this shared and distributed space? And again, similar to the sort of the balance of sort of this decentralized classrooms. You can't have one, it's not a one size fits all. It has to be different, the general purpose classroom, given all the different traffic that's coming through there. In some sense, we're seeing that in a smaller scale within engineering, what the electrical versus the bio versus the ag folks need versus chemicals different. But if I can work across all of them and create a network of facilities, classroom spaces to support that, now we're talking. And that's where the fun starts happening.
And I want to my first point about the beware of architects and wanting to make pretty spaces. Think we need to start thinking about learning spaces the way we think of lots of other things, like for example instructional design, in that you want a team of folks. You don't want an architect making all the decisions about a learning space. You want faculty that are going to use that space. You want people that know about learning and teaching to be at the table when those conversations are. And also, I think what we're thinking about at the Innovation Studio is having people at the table who want to do research about how the space is getting used. So, again, if that's anthropologists or sociologists or interactional folks who are interested in linguistics, I don't know who everyone in that team should be, but I think we're not thinking about learning spaces the way we think about so much else. We tend to make decisions about learning spaces with architects and folks from the office of the physical plant. So how's the heating, how's the HVAC going to work? And, it's sort of like that our K-12 schools are largely organized by the bus schedule. I understand why the bus schedule is important, but I don't think the bus schedule should decide the organization of the school day. So I think we're sort of in a similar place with space design right now, and that architects and OPP are making decisions about how learning spaces should be designed, and I think those people need to be at the table, but they shouldn't be running the show.
You need to invite the other people to the table to look at how they design schools now. They designed 2 schools in central Pennsylvania. They invited the community members, they invited the teachers, they had the architects there. I knew going in, I knew what the architects wanted to do, but at least you got the feeling that you had input on where that school is taking place, and that I could keep my view of Mountain County and still have an elementary school in the backyard, best day ever. So again, but they invited us in, and the problem that I see at Penn State happening is that people who are at the ground level are not invited into those discussions. And I've seen it happen with the design of rooms, that I walk into the room and I'm like, oh, there's a whiteboard, the counter in front of it. So for me to write on it, I have to crawl up on top of the counter and write. Now, for a grad TA, they can do that, me not so much. So, again, I think that's one of the sort of institutional things that sometimes
Yeah, we do have the University Committee on Instructional Facilities, and that's the sort of the overarching group that's responsible for any general purpose learning environment. And we do have faculty mentors on that committee, and we cycle them out every couple of years to get some fresh new perspectives. But no, it is definitely more important than ever. As 30 years ago, it was almost everyone was lecturing, and it's slowly moving away so that it's not all lecture anymore. And so as we get further into other teaching methodologies, we do need to start accommodating that more. And it is a concern. And, having the faculty assessment goes some way towards that. But yeah, we do need to have faculty on the ground level to say, is this fulfilling your need?
Can you give us some insight into how, because I think UCIF has a lot of potential to provide the answers a lot of people are talking about. What is a typical UCIF meeting or decision-making process?
The UCIF has people from Old Main, people that are budgetarily and sort of physically responsible for the buildings and the facilities on campus, and then there are people like my group who are responsible for implementing that. OPP, police services is on that committee. Basically, all the sort of factors that are needed in when we design the space. And we maintain a set guideline that gets updated every probably 2 or 3 times a year when we come up with, when we come to a realization. Things like, what is an acceptable sightline for a projector? Those sort of things are documented in our guideline to designing classrooms. And so the meetings are basically a proposed space comes up. Maybe we acquired some departmental space. Right now, I'll take for example 8 Mueller. 8 Mueller was rat cages, because that's where they.
That yellow chair that was chained to the ground. That was
right. And so we were able to take that space and convert it into a technology classroom. And so we had people from that department come in and help us advise that. Things came up like there was only one exit, and you can't have a classroom with one exit, so we had to put another exit. There was asbestos. There was all these other concerns. I mean, the facility ended up costing several $100,000, but at the end of the day, it works fair. The structure works fairly well because we were able to sort of get all those things working. But now, the more more we have the faculty involved, the better, because they're the ones. And on some level, I think we should try to start involving the students on that too. And that's really a piece that we're sort of missing right now.
They brought the elementary school.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I'm on the UCIF, so I'm the faculty, one of the few on the UCIF. So, but I think the problem with UCIF is that by the time it gets to that committee, there's not much I can say about a proposal that was submitted through UCIF. So even if I had the time and energy to work with every group on campus that's renovating a learning space, by the time UCIF is sort of it's an up or down vote, essentially, and a lot of decisions have been made in other places. So I think that's reasons I think I'm making an argument for this more local notion of a design team that knows the context, that lives at that campus, uses that facility, and try to also draw on expertise. Whether we do that through graduate students who have expertise in art and architecture and in anthropology or education. I don't know what that looks like, but I think I'd love to see that happen before the proposal goes to UCIF, so there's some doing that thinking before we do the sort of up and down vote on it.
We're not hosting lectures. What we hosted we developed multimedia pieces that students would review and see like specific concepts or points that needed to be made. Now I know that Chris's group is working with Lecture Capture 360, and I can see that there's going to be a huge problem if you take a 50-minute lecture and just post it up there and then require a student to look at it. There's a difference between requiring it and it being optional in this class. Now, I see that it would be more to the point of breaking that down into specific chunks or concepts that you want your students to get out of that. So, something similar to, looking at Millet.com and seeing those concise chunks. To answer your question, we didn't go over 5 minutes for each piece. We may have had multiple pieces, but we didn't go over 5 minutes for each piece because we wanted the attention span to stay with what they were writing. Yes, there were some. Well, we had articles, but there's no textbook. This is where they were getting. Well, and I think that it needs to be. Personally, we had articles, so we also had articles within that. So students would read an article, like a 1 or 2 page article about something, something specific related to the content. So.
Questions or comments? Covered a lot of area here. I think it's pretty clear that we need to put together a group that sort of provides pre-UCIF phase of that's a practical group event that happens. Nothing else. I know we're all going to meet a really long day, so maybe we'll just wrap it up here. Thank you all for coming out so much. There were a lot of really great conversations and a lot of discussions, and hopefully we'll continue this discussion.